Good evening, welcome. Thank you for joining us. This is Sarah Clinton talking, and I'm here joined by Jen Gable, and Lindsay Rosenman is going to be helping with questions, and Violetta Pawlowska, who's helped with our slide presentation tonight. So we're so glad that you can be here and go through this conversation with us tonight. This will be recorded, so we will be uploading it to the website later on. So if you miss anything, you can certainly go back. And we will be uploading other bits of information to the website as well. So please keep checking in with that over the next few weeks. Tonight we intend to go until about 7:30 with our presentation, and which time we want to be able to answer your questions. So thank you so much for submitting them ahead of time. We will be able to address a number of them throughout the presentation, but we will leave some time at the end. So if you can please enter your questions into the chat, and Lindsay's going to help moderate that for us throughout. I believe everybody is probably muted at this point, so we can appreciate if you aren't, if you could please do that. And we're excited to get started. So it's just some things to keep in mind as we go through this application season. These are 10 signs that college application season is upon us. Your first sign is that your high school senior gets at least 6 pieces of mail each day from the college that you've never heard of, wouldn't go to, or never would get into anyways.
Number 2, the first thing anyone ever says to you nowadays is, where is your daughter's son applying to school?
And the rule of thumb is that if your child is within earshot, you are not supposed to answer that question.
Teachers and coaches appear unaware that it's college application season. They just keep on piling on the homework.
And 4 times a week, you look at their chair in the dining room table and try to imagine what it will feel like empty.
At least 20 times a week, someone tells you that applying to 15 schools is insane.
You've stopped telling your son or daughter to clean up their room, figuring this will soon be their roommate's problem.
You just delete emails from Travelzoo and Princess Cruises.
And by October 15, those expensive college coaches are starting to look like a real bargain.
She or he knows you've tried to sneak a peek at his or her application because you mess up the password and get locked out every time.
I think those are pretty common and pretty universal for us all. Some things to keep in mind as we navigate this year's process. It does feel very different, I think, for many of us without being able to visit campuses in person and with COVID. And there are a lot of things that feel somewhat uncertain during this time. And our hope is that we can really listen to the advice of the college admissions counselors and trust in the process. They are trusting in their process, and they are very confident they're going to be able to evaluate these applications holistically. And we want to trust them, and please try to keep calm and assume positive intentions going forward. I think the second piece of advice that you'll hear us say throughout this presentation is that it's going to be helpful to do your research this year and to really look thoroughly at each school's website to find out what their policies are, how they are managing certain practices. So we will advise again and again, please double check their website, be very clear about how they're handling things. And then lastly, we are here to help, and we've met with your kids the past 2 days in groups to be able to go over a lot of these details we're going to cover tonight. And we will continue to meet with them in person over the next 6 weeks to make sure that we address their concerns, their questions. If you would like to meet, we are happy to do family Zoom meetings to go over your questions and concerns. And the counselors are going to be available in October for drop-in meetings on Thursdays and Fridays to go over essay help, common application help. We've done this in the past couple of years, and it's been very successful. So we are here to support you however we can. I always have, it's funny that this cartoon was created, because this is sort of what I keep in mind when I'm thinking of where the piles go and how admissions officers might be processing certain things. I think it does help to have a quick visual about what it might feel like when we're on this process. Just to set the stage, I think it's also important to think about the big picture here. And if you look closely at this graph, we're seeing that the majority of schools in the country, both public and private, do accept 50% or more of their applicants. So overwhelmingly, schools are accepting our students. They're very thrilled to have them attend. I think that the thing that we should note is that there is such a small number of public schools and private schools that are very highly selective, that only accept a certain percentage. But the overwhelming majority of the schools in the country really do accept the majority of their applicants. This is good news for our students. I think one of the things that gets challenging is that when we focus on those highly selective schools that only do accept a certain percentage, we want to understand why that happens. And while the text on this is a little bit light, it's an example of, if there are 38,000 high schools in the United States, that means there's going to be 38,000 valedictorians, 38,000 salutatorians, and perhaps 38,000 distinctly different senior class presidents, all capable, all deserving of a seat in a highly selective school. The challenge is that there's only 14,000 seats in the Ivy League for first-year students. And if you look even at Harvard, you get a smaller number still. These schools are not increasing the size of their freshman class, so this is where competition lies and why it becomes very challenging. So it's our job, I think, as professionals and as families, to really try to broaden our understanding of what success might mean and what a good fit in a good school might be for our students, so that we can really try to support them as much as possible. So when we look at last year's senior class, here are a few highlights from their application season, okay? The average number of applications each student produced was 10. So that seems like a pretty reasonable number. I think that's up from maybe 8 the year before. But they really were looking at 366 separate schools that they were applying to. The majority of our students, 85%, are applying by an early deadline, early decision, early action, or a priority deadline. So that means these next 6 weeks are going to be pretty busy. So that's something to really be mindful of. The University of Maryland had the 62 applications, the most frequently applied to school outside of New England. And this was surprising. I was double checking this statistic. Cornell had 8 students enroll from last year's class. They were the most frequently attended school outside of New England. It seems like a majority of our students stick around in New England, 60%, 38 sticking in Massachusetts, and our acceptance rate at UMass Amherst has gone up as well, which is also really encouraging.
So I'm going to be talking to you all about really the importance of having what we refer to as a balanced list. So as Sarah was saying, the average number of applications for students in the class of 2020 was 10. And last year's seniors, as she said, applied, 85% applied somewhere ED, EA, and or priority application. And so when we think about what those applications represent, it's important to remember that the selectivity range for your student, which is going to look different for each particular student. And what we always say that students should really like those likely schools. So those schools to which they are what we look at when we're going to be looking at some scattergrams in the next couple of slides. What we look at where your students' GPA and test scores is what we look at and say, oh, that's all in the green. So we really like to have 3 to 4 schools as likelies, as the baseline of kind of the base of our pyramid. And then in the middle, you're going to have 3 or 4 schools that are possibilities, good targets, and then maybe a couple of reach schools in there too. And also keeping in mind that those schools to which your student is likely to get in, meaning that they're one of the strongest applicants, that is also really your best bet in terms of merit-based financial aid. So that's another reason as we think about, okay, what do those 10 applications represent and how you're going to position those applications as far as like a balanced list, having most of your schools really in that likely category. And that when students have most of their schools looking like that, that also takes a lot of the stress away when it's like, you know, these are schools I'm likely to get into, and I also really like them. And isn't that reassuring? So that's how we like to think about it, and what makes sense from our professional lens. So wanted to just look at a couple of histograms. This one happens to be from the University of Pittsburgh. And this represents here, when you can look at and see that this is just Acton-Boxborough students who have applied to the University of Pittsburgh in the last couple of years. And as you can see here, this is by SAT scores. You can also put that in by ACT scores. And this is really, the scattergrams represent the very best predictor that we have in order to get a sense of, all right, I'm supposed to have this balanced list, and how do I figure that out? So in part, you can look at those scattergrams as a starting place. And then in order to get a deeper dive into that, you can also reach out to your student's counselor, because they have more information around major and selectivity, and just kind of making sure that together we all work in conjunction to have a balanced list. So we looked at the University of Pittsburgh. Now we're looking at UMass Lowell as a scattergram. What you can see is that there is some variability, right? So it might be a little bit more of a art than a science, although we do see some clear trends with UMass Lowell. So at the bottom, which I'm not sure you're able to see, the X's represent denied, and then the green squares are acceptances, the blue are waitlists. So this is a really good tool for you all to reference and access. So then we're gonna go on to one of those uber selective schools. So this is the University of Pennsylvania. And, you know, with schools like this, we on the college counseling side as school counselors kind of scratch our heads. And as you can see, there are wonderful students who, you know, who may have sort of checked every box, done everything right with GPA testing, all of these things. And yet, you know, they still may not get in to their schools, which is disheartening. So it's, when, as Sarah said, kind of go back to the things you can control, and what you can control is making sure you have a balanced list. So that is something that we all can work together on.
Jenny, I'm just going to interrupt for a second because a question came into the chat about scattergrams. So while we're on it, I just thought this was just a good spot. So where so many students don't have SAT scores or ACT scores this year, parents are wondering how they can use the scattergrams, you know, effectively.
Right. That's a great question. Really good question. And I would say that, and Sarah or anyone else can also chime in if you wanted to put in your 2 cents here too as well. So what we know and have heard over the years from college admission officers, really the most important part of a student's application for most colleges is really the student's transcript. So the classes, the rigor, the grades, the rigor of classes, and also the profile of Acton-Boxborough Regional High School. So that is still your best predictor. So in terms of the scattergrams, you know, as you can see, I would go back and, you know, look at the GPA first, and then kind of figure out from there, because there is still, if you look at UMass Lowell, you look at a 3.5 and there's still some students not getting in, and yet that I would still call that, a target at the 3.5 level on the continuum of testing. And also knowing that many, many schools have gone test optional, so that's going to be another piece. I don't know if anybody else wanted to chime in and add anything to that answer.
No, I think that, Jenny, I think you covered it. I think that's what we're going to do.
Yeah, the biggest, the most important piece is still going to be, and it always has been, the high school transcript and the rigor of AB. So again,
just one more note to add is that even though a lot of students don't have an SAT score, they probably had a PSAT score, which you can also use with the scattergrams. That's it.
True. You can kind of sort of project out with that too. Good point. Yeah. So just wanted to do a little bit of a deeper dive into the admission terminology, and everybody's, like all students are coming from different places to this journey of college admission. All parents are too. So some of you in the audience may have, this may be your second or third student going through the process, and you understand all this admission terminology. And also we know that for some, this is your first go around. So just wanted to review some of these terms as we throw them around sometimes without meaning to. So just wanted to back up that early decision is the binding agreement where a student is allowed can choose to apply to only one institution. If they are accepted, they enroll. The student has to sign an agreement. The parent or guardian, I should say, has to sign an agreement, as well as the counselor. So that is a binding agreement. Students can only apply to one school during early decision. Now, some students will apply to one school early decision and maybe another school early action. And once they get into the early decision school, they need to let their early action school know that they've already committed. So some of the most salient points to remember about this is that early decision, you really think, and what Sarah said, do your research and homework, really think about, is this your first choice school, especially after considering the financial ramifications of an early decision plan? Because what happens with early decision is that you are not going to be able to know perhaps you won't be able to know the financial aid awards of any other institution, just your early decision school. So we really caution families to look at that very carefully and make sure that it's a good fit, both in terms of the school and also for your family as an overall, in terms of the overall financial picture as well. So there's also something called early decision 2, which usually happen in early January or mid-January. It's often right after, it's very strategic. It's usually right after, say, the most selective schools have let people know about the early decision 1. And then some students will choose to apply to early decision 2. And so this same binding piece holds true for early decision 2. So the potential outcomes for early decision are you can be accepted, deferred, which means you get put to the regular application pool, or you can be denied. So that's a long-winded answer to early decision. Now there is something else called early action, which is non-binding. Some call it EA1 or EA2. Basically, it gives students an opportunity to know their outcomes early, and in some cases that makes some sense. And in some cases, depending on the major, like Purdue with engineering as an example, they encourage students to apply under early action. So I would suggest that your student gets in touch with the counselor and kind of makes a plan for, does early action make sense for you? And also knowing that last year was obviously very different, given that we didn't have, grades for the last part of the year. And so maybe for some students, it's going to make more sense not to apply early. So this is a very individual choice, is something else to really keep in mind.
If I may interject here,
Absolutely.
another piece of information and advice is that very many colleges that do offer nursing programs either require or strongly encourage prospective students who are hoping to pursue nursing as their major to apply via early action.
Yes, thank you so much, Dee, for throwing, making sure that people are aware of that. So I would say to have your student meet with their counselor and kind of look over that list, because there is a bit of, I would call, strategy in how you're going to apply depending on each individual student. So rolling admission means that after the institution receives all of the application materials, they roll out a decision. So it's not that, meaning that there's not like a set time where they release all their decisions. It's rolling. So it's things become complete and then they roll out a decision. And then regular decision is probably what we all most remember, dating myself, and would say that, you apply in January or February and you hear, in April, and then you deposit in May. So that's, so again, just something also to keep in mind, which I think probably most of us told our seniors today, we are starting very, very early. Nobody is behind right now. So just giving you like an overview of the landscape, everybody can apply regular decision, which is not really till January or February. And here it is September. So we're all in good shape. So again, we wanted to talk about early decision, and because if you are kind of a savvy consumer and have looked at the data, there is definitely an admission bump for 2 students who are able to apply early decision, okay? So if you look at the numbers, for many colleges that offer that, you can look at the outcomes for early decision, and there is a bump. And also, it's important to make sure that this is a thoughtful decision beyond that bump. So something to keep in mind, have I adequately vetted that this is my first choice? Can I really afford to pay this sticker price? Or, am I really, as a family unit, going to want to look at, okay, the different merit opportunities at perhaps other institutions? How likely, I think all the counselors here, and especially the 4 of us on this panel, we've been doing this for collectively many, many years. And, we have seen students who have applied early decision and then been all set and ready to go and all in. And then the next year, they're the ones who are wanting to transfer. So, sometimes that happens when you're 18, you change your mind. And then, the other thing that students should think about is, am I able to really put this strongest application I can by November 1, or am I just feeling rushed and panicked and not able to do that in a thoughtful manner? And then, you can look at, and in conjunction with your counselor, to really figure out and do a deep dive, like how much will early decision will help me in my chances of admission, and that will vary by institution. So there's not an exact formula to this. I think the biggest takeaway I would say is something to, these are adult conversations that, our students are always wanting to be, treated like an adult. Well, here we go. This is an adult conversation that you need to have with your student, and you know, and then if you're all in, then that's great. So we just wanted you to really thoughtfully consider if you're all in for early decisions.
Thanks, Jen. Okay, so this year has been incredibly stressful, I think, for students and parents in trying to navigate how standardized testing will work. And many of you have had registrations and after registrations and cancellations after cancellations. I think some people have even driven to a test site only to find that it was canceled that day. This has been really challenging for people across the country. So in discussion boards and different messaging sites that we're a part of, we've heard this in all places where students are really confused and discouraged and trying to understand the best choices that they have. The colleges will say over and over again, they don't want people to be putting themselves at risk by driving to another state, by going through extraordinary measures to try to take these tests. And because the testing has not been universally available to people across the country, by and large, most schools have gone test optional. There are a few state systems, I believe in Florida and I think Georgia, that have still held on to their requirements, and perhaps a few other private schools that have said that they do want to see those scores. But the majority of colleges and universities have said that they're going test optional. And when they say test optional, that really does mean optional. It means that they will evaluate applications equally depending on how you want to be viewed as a student. There isn't an advantage to sending scores or not sending scores. There can't be if they're truly going to be optional and look at things holistically. And some schools have been doing this for years and they're really well experienced and they're very comfortable with their practices. And some are doing it for the first time. Tufts has adopted a 3-year plan to see how this works. And so it's going to be interesting to see what the future of standardized tests really looks like. I think a number of schools have even gone what they consider test blind, which says that they won't be looking at anybody's scores. If you send them, they're still not going to consider them because they really feel like that will be the most equal footing for all students in this process. We are going to be offering the SAT and the ACT here. That was definitely a late breaking decision. You heard about it immediately after it was approved and announced here at school. So we understand that does change things up a little bit for students, especially if it's something that people thought they weren't going to prepare for. And I think students may question, well, what do I do now? Do I study, and how do I organize my time? I think we really do want you to focus on your current courses and your applications first before stressing about studying for these kinds of exams. I think if you have the time and you'd like to prepare a little bit, great, but this is definitely not the first priority in the overall landscape of things. Students might still question, should I take them or not? And if we think it's going to add to your application, if we think that your scores are going to be higher than the published average of their students that are applying, and that would be a great asset, then by all means, go for it. If we think that your scores are going to be in the lower end of the published average, or below that average, or even sometimes in the middle, it might not be worth it to go through that extra stress and strain in this year at this late date. So optional truly does mean optional. If you are going to send scores, most schools do want an official score report, either from the College Board or ACT. So that's something that students do need to request ahead of time so that it does get sent to the school. I think the only thing that we've noted is a little bit complicated in this process is that if you are applying early decision and you have a November 1st deadline, these tests, the October 24th ACT score will not be prepared in time. So students really do need to know if they're applying early decision, if they're counting on these test scores and these administrations to be part of their application, they won't have a chance to look at them ahead of time. And they might want to rethink. If they're really counting on these scores, they might not want to do early decision. So early decision means that you are absolutely ready to go by November 1st, everything in hand. It's also possible that you could say, yes, I would like to send my scores and have them rush to the school as soon as they're available, but you wouldn't have a chance to see them and to evaluate that. So we do want to be very cautious about what each college's policy is about sending scores, and really make an individual decision about whether that is the right path for your student. The other thing that becomes really important then in its place is the essay. And I think while the essay has always been an important part of the application piece, mostly because it's the students, it's the student's voice, and they're able to put themselves in 3D, so to speak, and really introduce themselves and the way that they think and the way they are in the world to the admissions team. I think now schools are going to be looking at those a little bit more closely as they're trying to make holistic reviews and understand, how does that student fit into our current class? What kind of student would they be on campus? So in that way of thinking, we really want to get to know the person. And I think a lot of students get hung up on creating this magnificent work of art that is so detailed and chiseled and gone over and edited so many times that they might lose the voice and the authenticity of what that essay is really supposed to capture, where we kind of want this kind of spirit. We want to really understand who this person is. What is their personality? What does it feel like when you're in their presence? That's definitely more, it's definitely an American value to understand the individual and find out what makes them tick. And that is a very different approach to this. But I think this is what colleges are really trying to understand. This is not meant to be a professional introduction of you as a engineering student, but really as, who would you be when you're back in the dorm? Who would you be when you're interacting with your professors? Who would you be on campus as a member of our community? And where would you fit into that grouping? So really trying to get this sort of authentic personality and spirit and 18-year-old voice into the essay is very important. We tell our students to really be the ultimate editors, and while we're happy to give them feedback and talk through some editing, I definitely want it to be the student's voice. And we do suggest that they are cautious about how many people they have read their essay, because too many people can make it really overwhelming. So know that we've suggested that they do that, and really be mindful about how many people they're getting on board with their essay. And all of these things make senior year very stressful, especially during these next 6 weeks. There you go.
There we go. I was muted. Classic Zoom thing, right? So as Sarah was saying, there is a lot to manage for students, for parents, for all of us during this time. And so we're going to break down the student responsibilities, and in groups, your student would have gotten a senior year checklist of, kind of upcoming tasks. So I would say the first one that we all have said in our group meetings is, please reach out to have the student reach out to the counselor to set up a time to meet individually. And also, parents are welcome to join for these meetings. In some ways, it might be easier now more than ever to have you kind of jump onto Zoom, where we're happy to have you there, as long as you've run it by your student and that's what they would prefer as well. And so what the students are going to be doing is really completing their applications. So there's a number of steps that go along with that. I would say for right now, some of the things that they would be wanting to do is reach out to the teacher who has written or is writing their main letters of recommendation, and let them know that, well, first of all, thank them for writing the letter, and then also to let them know what their first deadline is, okay? The other things that the student would want to do is complete the student response form, which is on Naviance. As I said, they'll be filling out their applications, and the students need to be releasing their SAT or ACT scores if they're choosing to do that via College Board or ACT student. We at Acton Boxborough do not send any test scores, so that's something that's important to keep in mind. We have a transcript release form, which is now online, and we are asking that it's a form that you fill out for the colleges, the student fills out for the colleges to which they're applying to, and we're asking that is filled out 20 business days ahead of the earliest deadline. So that's just because we get a backlog of transcripts that need to be sent out. And if you're sitting there saying, oh dear, I've just missed that 20 days, don't panic, you're okay. Just have your student reach out to their counselor, and we can help with that, okay? That's all right. Just moving forward, it's good to be cognizant of those deadlines. So basically, after the student has filled out that transcript release form, you can think, in essence, they've passed the baton over to the counseling department, where as long as they've let their teachers know the earliest deadline, then the counseling department will take care of sending the transcript, the school profile, which talks about the rigor of Acton Boxborough High School that we send to each individual school. We send out the teacher recommendations and the counselor recommendations, as well as the first and second term grades. The student needs to send their application and their test scores. So the other things that Sarah talked about was, if students are interested in registering for the SAT or ACT, check out that email that came out from Ms. Dandridge. And then the other thing that we're going to be talking a little bit more about is Financial Aid Night. There are some webinars that are available from MEFA, the Massachusetts Educational Financing Authority. And I just want to put in a plug for MEFA. They are a great resource for financial aid, scholarships, lots of different things. And then there are, as we mentioned earlier, drop-in college application help with counselors, as well as setting up individual appointments. So where we are now doing a lot of things virtual, we're actually doing all of the same things. This same group of counselors has usually done the fall college night, and we've been on stage, and now we're, Zooming. We've learned Zooming now. so we're doing all of the same things. We're just pivoting and doing in a different format. So it's kind of exciting. New skills are good. All right, so this is the transcript release form, and as I mentioned, what goes out with that is the transcript, first and second term grades. The teacher and counselor recommendation will get sent. So once you fill that out, you're knowing that we're going to take care of all those pieces. And this is what it looks like. It's a little bit light, as I can see here. And also it will just go directly to your student's counselor. All right. So the Common App, in meeting with seniors today, I was really pleased to see that some of my seniors who have started the Common Application, and don't panic if your student has not started the Common Application. As I said, we are early, you are fine. The Common Application, though, what I overwhelmingly heard is that students were saying, oh, it wasn't as bad. Like, it's not that bad. It's just, there are different parts of it. And so I think once you get started, students realize that they've got this. So we'll just look at a couple of different parts of the Common Application. So the first one is really a lot of demographics about the student, the family, the education, basic, kind of questions, demographics. So those are all that part, the education section. And then there's a part on the FERPA release. So that is what colleges have advised us about. Students will waive their rights to read the recommendation letters. Students have specific questions about that, they can always reach out to their counselor. So that's the FERPA release.
Ooh, and that was it.
And then I think there's a question also about COVID-19, which Sarah's going to get a little bit more into on one of the later slides. Am I right, Sarah?
I think it's right here.
Oh, it's right here.
I think we're right here. Yeah.
We're right here. Okay.
Yeah, no, we're right here. Okay. So this is a new slide, obviously, to the application, and it is an optional question. And we really mean that, and every bit of feedback that we have from admissions officers says this is absolutely optional. And the thing that we want to highlight here is if your student's life has been significantly impacted by COVID-19, or perhaps another natural disaster, depending on where you might live in the country, that might be something that is really important to you right now. This is where you might want to talk about major changes in your world or your lifestyle or your approach that have happened because of this. There will be people across the country that are talking about how their parents perhaps have lost their jobs because of this, how they might have very difficult financial states right now because of this. Some students may have lost parents or siblings or family members because of this. We really are talking about significant impacts. Some students might be working to help support their family at this point. So keeping that in mind, students would not want to write about how they didn't get to play baseball in the spring. They wouldn't want to write that they were so disappointed that they couldn't go to camp. They wouldn't want to write about how their grades were only pass, no record, and that they didn't get to bring up their GPA, because that would be the same for everybody. Nobody got to participate in spring sports. Nobody got to travel or do those kinds of opportunities. So that's going to be the same for everybody. We really want to think about how were you personally impacted if you were. So many students are going to say no, and this is optional, and that's fine. There's no expectation that you need to put something profound, that you need to have done this amazing service project. If you just weathered this quarantine like most of us, that is good enough. That being said, some students maybe were working and they were frontline workers in this situation. Maybe they were working at the grocery store and they picked up extra shifts. That may have had an interesting impact on their perception of who they are, and that they are in fact contributing to the greater community with their efforts there. And maybe there's something to say about that. I think that could be an interesting story to tell. Maybe there are some students that really did reach out and do some kind of service work to be able to participate and engage in some way that was meaningful to them. So I think if you had something to say, and what I was telling my students today was that if you're going to write something here, you would want to feel like it is a really legitimate part of your life and your story, and that has really impacted you. If it was just a passing thing and you just feel like writing something extra, it's not necessarily going to feel authentic or needed. So it's really about, if somebody were to call you and ask you a question about this experience, you'd want to be very comfortable and very confident going on in depth about what this was that you did and how it impacted you.
Sarah, can I just add, because I've had a couple of questions coming in on the chat around this, that Both in our school profile and on the transcripts, we give colleges information about how our grading was impacted by COVID last spring. So that is information that we are sharing as a school with colleges. It's not necessary for students to share it in this section. And in addition to that, if students have a specific situation that they feel like they would like to see addressed around how COVID impacted them, impacted their grades, impacted their spring, that's something that can also be spoken about in the counselor letter. So we encourage students, if they have something that they want to have addressed around COVID, that is another venue and another way for it to be addressed. So there are multiple ways to address it, not just through this COVID question. So just wanted to make sure to add that.
Yeah, thank you, Lindsay. That's definitely a good point. I think we've probably touched on these things throughout our conversation thus far, but I think this is some of the feedback from admissions people across the country, and really thinking about your time over the next few weeks, where you want to focus your energy, what you want to controlling the things that you can, thinking about early decision and what that might mean for your application. And I think the other thing, people have asked questions about deferrals and how will that impact, if students from the class of 2020 deferred, how will that impact your class? And I think the interesting thing from some admissions officers, they may say there weren't as many as they thought, or many of them were international students that couldn't come to the country, so their status is still uncertain, or many people deferred for one semester and might be joining in for the spring. So admissions folks do not expect it to be as monumental as we might fear it to be. Naviance is something that is a tool that we're glad to be using, but I think it's something that you might be using too. One of the features that we've added this year is something that will help to keep track of our visits. So we aren't having our college visits in the same format in the counseling center, but they are available online. We've reached out to the schools that typically come to visit our AB, and it was populated very quickly with schools that are eager to engage with our students. So we let students know about this. We suggest that they go into these events pages and look at who's coming and sign up for these Zooms. It will be a virtual event hosted by the school, but it's a great way to learn more about the college, to learn about some of the aspects that aren't as apparent on the website, and to potentially interact with the admissions counselors. So when these admissions folks would come to campus, there were often times where you might have one or two kids that are sitting at the table, and they have the opportunity for a really fantastic informal private chat. I would expect that to be the same. So this is a great chance for students to be able to, in a relaxed setting, get to know these schools a little bit, and perhaps have the schools get to know them as well. So we definitely encourage people to sign up for that. Along those lines, I would say that colleges really have put tremendous effort into making online resources for students to engage. So whether they're having virtual tours or virtual information sessions, or panels where they're having students talk about college life, ways that they can connect students to current students to talk about their experience. I've even heard of students sitting in on virtual classes at schools to be able to get a sense of it. They really are trying to help engage students as much as they can. And the feedback is that they would love students to really take advantage of that and do their research. If you're going to these events virtually, and you're registering for them and signing up for them and interacting with the schools, they note that, and that's something that they really would consider as a piece of demonstrated interest. And they're more likely to extend admission to somebody that is likely to attend, that has put in the research and is likely to accept that invitation. So they do track that kind of information. Financial aid is another thing. So we always put this slide at the end of our student presentation. We should probably put it first because I don't want them to glaze over at this point. But this is definitely an important part, and the part that they really, really need your help with, because you are the keepers of the numbers. You have the actual information, and it's definitely useful if we're looking at assigning roles and sort of divvying up some of this work. If this is something that parents can take on, that would be fabulous. So a couple of different key things to keep in mind here. Please read as the students are reading the admissions page of each school very thoroughly to understand their process. We encourage you to read the financial aid page very thoroughly so that you know their process. Some schools only require the FAFSA, which is the federal form that you do online. Some schools also require something called the CSS profile, and which is a lot more detailed, takes in different bits of information. And these two do take some time to complete. So we wanna be mindful of how much work is involved so that we can get them in before the deadlines. So please know that. And schools might have their own specific financial aid application form too. So you wanna make sure that you're not missing out on potential money because we've missed a form in the process. I suggest that students take a look at what scholarships are available at particular schools. Sometimes you might find that a school has a really amazing scholarship program that your student might be a really great candidate for, and maybe that school then works its way up on your list as being a more attractive school, especially as we're trying to think about which schools are applying to early and how are we making these decisions. Really thinking about the financial implications is super important. We definitely, as Jenny was saying, when we're looking at the list and making sure that you have a balanced list, we're really looking at a range of affordability and wanting to cover our bases so that you have options in the end. A lot may change over the next year, and we really want people to have good choices at the end of the day. So parents might be able to really help by researching some of these additional scholarships. Navient has a listing. There's a couple of different websites that also have some great clearinghouses and might be able to refer students to different scholarships. You might find that the companies that you work for might offer certain scholarships, or if you know that there's any organization that you're a part of or a club that you might be a member of, they might offer certain scholarships too. So really thinking about that. We do offer local scholarships here where students will complete that in one application form, usually in February, I believe that goes online. So that won't be for a little while, but there is definitely some local money that's awarded each year, quite a significant amount. So we will think about that as well.
Sarah was mentioning.
Sorry, before we move on from financial aid, I just wanted to note that at some colleges that if you want to be in consideration for merit scholarships, you need to fill out the FAFSA. I had a question come in around if you feel that you're not an aid candidate, do you need to do it? And so that's just something that's important to note. And again, a lot of this is looking at the fine print on the financial aid websites of different colleges, but even if you've done net price calculators, you've done finaid.org and found out that you're likely not a financial aid candidate, your child may need to still submit the FAFSA in order to be qualified for scholarships.
Yeah, that's a great segue and point into thinking about how can parents be helpful in the process. And the FAFSA, which is the financial aid forms that Lindsay was just talking about, as well as the CSS profile, those are the things that will need to be done, in conjunction with the student, and likely more on the parent, because you're the ones likely with the most income and assets. And so what you could do that would be likely helpful about figuring, for you to figure out as parents is, making a spreadsheet of what's required of each school in terms of financial aid, and then merit-based aid. So, many institutions will have merit-based aid. And so you can use the net price calculators that Sarah's going to talk a little bit more about, each college will have a net price calculator. So you can get a sense of what the actual cost would be for your student when you put in your finances, as well as usually it's the GPA and often then it's the test scores as well.
One other thing that I'm so sorry.
Go ahead.
Sorry, Jenny.
No, go ahead, Lee.
What I was also hoping to sort of interject here, just add a bit more information. I would really like to help Massachusetts Educational Financier Authority in advertising their programs, because when I conducted my senior groups yesterday and today, and certainly went over financial information and resources, I sort of referred them and showed the links to live presentations that MIFA has and will be organizing throughout this time of year. And they do have very basic, I would say, webinars on college financing. Some of those sessions feature financial aid directors from the area colleges. And some of the webinars are specific to these financial aid forms that we've mentioned. The FAFSA, that is free application for federal students aid. And this is the financial aid application that absolutely each and every college in the United States requires of any student who is applying for financial aid. And then there is also a specific CSS profile webinar that MIFA offers. So I really would like to refer you to that website for more information.
Thank you, V. You might be able to tell by our frequent references to financing that we all have teenagers in the house, and so have a particular lens and understanding of what you all might be thinking about as far as financing. So it has become clearer and clearer as our children have gotten older. And in all seriousness, MIFA is a great web resource, and Lindsay just put some information about webinars down on the chat. So as I'm also looking at this in terms of parent responsibilities, I'm also thinking about this as a parent and a counselor myself. So this whole bucket of promote ownership and independence is sometimes challenging for us parents, and also is important in terms of really listening to your student and taking a backseat as much as you can. Because the truth is, you're not going to college with them. And I know that can be hard. I really, really get it. So just sort of, all right, if they're not ready to do early, okay, January, February, deep breaths, people, and allowing your student to showcase his or her own strengths, and so meaning, if they're doing the activities section, for example, to let them kind of go through that process and use the resources of the counselors, and not over editing it yourselves, and to sort of, again, breathe, take a step back, and nudge sporadically, don't nag frequently sometimes. And thinking about, okay, maybe we're just gonna set up some parameters, and maybe we're just gonna talk about college once a week at an appointed time, and instead of you wanting information as a parent and not being able to get it because the student's not ready. So maybe sort of saying like, all right, let's figure out a way that this is going to work for us together, so we don't drive each other crazy, and maybe have a little bit of fun with it.
Yeah. Jen, I would also chime in that if your student is really dragging their feet about this, it's also possible that they're not ready, or that they don't feel like this is the right step for them. So we do want to be mindful of the cues that they're telling us. If they aren't outwardly saying this, it might be worth asking, is this something that you, not in a like snarky, I'm mad at you way, but like, is this is this really something that you're ready for? Is this really something that you want to do? Because there's lots of other options. And for many students, taking a gap year and doing something different, and maybe traveling or volunteering or working, could really help them grow in a marvelous way. So we want to be open. We are open to those conversations if you have those concerns.
Yeah, absolutely, Sarah. So what our students are telling us when we're perceiving it as not doing certain steps can also be putting on the brakes, I'm not ready, and listening in that way from sort of what they're not doing, and being open, because the truth is oftentimes students don't want to disappoint us as parents. So, I would say basically what you can also do is your students the best, and some of our students are, what's the word, taskmasters, project managers. They like nothing better than rolling up their sleeves and color coding everything and getting a calendar out. And then there are others of us who look at this big task and checklist from the senior parent group or the senior groups and are thinking, oh my gosh, how am I even going to begin? Where do I start? And people are usually somewhere in the middle as well, right? So what can be helpful for those who aren't color coding everything and getting everything organized is for you to say, all right, let's lay this out. Like, this is how I would organize it. This is how I would set it up. Or maybe that's also not your wheelhouse, and maybe y'all can do it together. So, I would say that is one thing. There are deadlines with this process, and we are really early already. So just, helping kind of guide your student with making a game plan overall and putting it into pieces can be really helpful, more manageable pieces. And we're also, as your counselors, here to help with that as well. So, we're all in this together for sure. And I think the last bullet, which I can't really see down there, but it has about the parent-to-parent chatter, which, as parents, you all have your support groups, right? And you all have, your go-to people who you get advice from, and also people at this stage as senior parents there can be some chatter, in the grocery store. Maybe not anymore with COVID, but maybe that's an upside of COVID. Anyway, what I'm trying to say is that what you will want to do as a parent is to kind of check yourself when you encounter that well-meaning person who is saying, have you done this? Have you done that? And you start, your shoulders start going up and you start thinking, oh my goodness, I'm behind. Again, deep breath. None of us are behind.
Me too.
If you hear something that you're wondering about, reach out to your student's counselor, check in with yourself, and carry on. So again, we're back to the finances. Be open and honest with those communication with your student about and that really helps setting expectations early to avoid disappointments later, to just sort of be transparent. This is what we're looking at as a family unit, and these are sort of how we need to make decisions as a family. So recognize that it's by its very nature, the college process itself is filled with lots of different emotions for students and parents. And, it can kind of go all over the place. And perhaps now more than ever, as I'm thinking about this, we're probably the best prepared now. You all are probably the best prepared set of parents, because I would imagine we've all been riding this kind of wave for a number of months now, given the pandemic. So, you know, maybe we've got a buffered up toolbox at this point. And also, so just be prepared. It's going to keep on cresting and falling.
This little plug here is there's a film by Ben Stiller that talks about the parent's perspective of having his son go through this process and what that feels like as an individual and what it means for us all to be getting older, and this sort of stage of parenting is coming to an end, and there's a lot of neat stuff in there. Did we get most of this? I think so.
I think we did. And the last bullet, I guess, watch your biases and sources of information would be, you know, things have changed in terms of selectivity hugely in the last, since we all went to college, and even in the last 5 years. And also, so watch your own biases about what you consider to be a quote unquote good college. And then the other thing is, you know, sort of your source of information is where did you learn this piece, and is this someone who you trust and value, or is it someone who heard of something? And anyway, so watch your source of information. That's just the one bullet I would probably pull out that we haven't already mentioned.
Yeah. I think the other thing I would say is that it's really easy to get excited about this, especially if you remember doing this. It doesn't feel that long ago. I remember that feeling of showing up to college on that very first day and moving in with my parents, and it feels somewhat fresh to me, even though it was a very long time ago. And it's easy to get really excited about this, but we need to keep in mind that kids then see our expectations, and then they do worry about disappointing us, and they do worry about how this is all going to come together. So we want to reassure our kids that they're going to be great wherever they land, and that we trust them and we value them as people, and they're worthy just because of who they are. And sometimes we might need to slow down on the excitement. And then it's going to happen. Like, these applications are going to leave your desk, and then there's going to be this period of time where you're just waiting, and you don't have any more tasks, and it's going to be this huge weight that's lifted off your shoulders for a short period of time. And we really want to relish in those weeks where you cannot expect an answer, and there's nothing left to do, and you can just live, and it's a wonderful thing. And then the nervousness will start to build again as we approach the date where the letters or the responses will come back. And then we'll go through all that cycle as well. But we are here to support you in any way we can throughout the process. And please reach out with whatever questions that you have.
So I think that I'd like to just start moving through a few of the questions that have come in the chat, and some that had come in previously through the Google form that we might not have addressed. So I had a cluster of questions that were about grade point average, class rank, which we don't do at Acton-Boxborough, and how colleges can understand the GPA in the context of the school. So I was wondering if we could speak to that a little bit.
So do you want me to answer?
Oh, I mean, I can answer.
Yeah, anybody, yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll answer that one, and then we'll kind of go from there. So, as Lindsay said, we don't rank students at Acton-Boxborough. Many institutions do not rank it. We did a lot of research a number of years ago, and it really doesn't serve our students well to rank students, so we don't do that. It's not an uncommon practice. And also, in terms of colleges understanding how we do calculate the GPA, how we figure all that out. I'm so glad that someone asked that, because part of what will go to every college is our school profile, and you can look at that and access that online, and it's a comprehensive description of how we do our grading, the rigor of our students, which is by all objective measures very, very strong given our test scores and all of those benchmarks. And also it does a dive into understanding our leveling system, the AP classes we offer. So it is the document that when colleges, admission folks will be trying to figure out the rigor of the high school, that's what they refer to and that's what they look at. And it is something that, you know, many of our colleges already know Acton Box Pro, but it's also something that some new admission person could pick up and be like, wow, this is a very competitive school and this is how I figure out the GPA. And also that's their job. It's their job as admission people to look through all of these profiles and understand the nuances.
What I would like to also add here is that oftentimes when or even in my senior groups or when I meet with my juniors and or parents, if there are questions around calculation of GPAs and their importance, what I oftentimes like to share is that there's a reason as to our students' transcripts list colleges, college courses, not college courses, I'm sorry, classes that they have taken over the course of 3+ years at the high school. So page 1 shows all the classwork, earned credits and grades that students completed. And this is what the college admissions counselors are going to see when they review the rigor of your students' classes. And again, read in the context of AB, the way that they know it. And that grade point average, the weighted one and unweighted, appears only on page 2. And in fact, many colleges recalculate students' GPAs and they ignore the GPA weighted, unweighted that we calculate. Some do take our calculation, but there's a great variety, and it is more so the rigor and the quality of classes and the performance in these classes that your students have shown that is more important than the actual GPA calculation.
I have a question that had come in on the Google form that I think that we'd like to address. Given that we don't know what next fall will look like or what the type of college experience will be for students, is there any harm in going to a community college for a year to take prerequisites and then apply to a larger school the following year when things are hopefully more normal? So maybe we want to address what that might look like for a student and also some of the advantages to starting in a community college for many students.
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and I think many families might be considering that. The challenge being is that then when you do apply, you're applying as a transfer student, so you can't just get these out of the way and then still apply as a college freshman. Once you've accumulated these credits and these grades, you have a college transcript and you're now transferring. And some schools have very positive transfer acceptance rates, and some schools might be harder to transfer into. And then of course that will also depend on the program and the major that you're trying to get into. So it's something to think about very carefully. If you have a student that might be undecided or isn't really sure what they want to do or how they want to manage their future, that might be the most affordable way to start, and it might really make a lot of sense. There's certainly lots of incentives where if you were to start at a community college and then transfer within the state system, if they can make it an automatic transfer if you maintain a certain grade point average and if you take the appropriate prerequisite classes. There's also a financial incentive that if you earn a certain GPA, they may give you a discount on tuition. So you could enroll at Middlesex and you could graduate from UMass Amherst and really save a tremendous amount of money if you have a student that's pretty savvy and ready to make that kind of move.
A couple more quick questions. One. sorry, someone is unmuted here. One was a question around whether students would have a spot for a resume on the Common App. Yes, they can include that in the additional information section. There was a question around interviews, and I just wanted to respond that counselors are very happy to do practice interviews with students. We often will practice interview each other's students so that it'll be more of a regular type situation with somebody that you don't know. So certainly if your student will be interviewing for colleges, and we do recommend that if a college offers an interview that your student takes advantage of that and signs up for the interview if a college is offering that. If they'd like some practice, they should let their counselor know. And I did want to just re-emphasize a point that we talked about at the end about sort of the parent chatter amongst them, each other about which colleges, you know, different kids are applying to. When we met with our students yesterday and today, we spoke to them also about student chatter and really trying to keep your own individual process to yourself, an individual, that your safety school may be somebody else's reach school, that your favorite school may be a school someone else hated, and to really consider how this is an individual process and how talking about this constantly can be harmful and hurtful. So that's a message that we emphasize with the students today, and we hope that in your conversations with your seniors that you're emphasizing that as well, to be kind and considerate about how this is an individual process and the process impacts different people differently, and that the schools that every student applies to are going to be different based on their own interests, needs, and fit. And I think that we have hit most of the questions that have come in. I just saw 2 more pop up in the chat, so let me just see. I think we're pretty good. Certainly, we highly encourage you to contact your student's counselor as questions come up that are individual for yourself and your family. I hope that I was able to get to everything. I was doing a lot of private responses in the chat for questions that I felt like we weren't necessarily addressing in our presentation that were kind of person specific. But please don't hesitate to reach out to your child's counselor. We're here to support families. We're here for the students, but we're certainly here for the parents too. So email us and we will get back to you quickly, you know, within a day or so with responses. So we love working with your students, and we know that this is a year unlike any other. And we're really excited for this year's senior class to support them in their dreams and their possibilities.
Thank you all so much for coming and giving of your time this evening.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you all. We appreciate working with you all.
And we will be posting a PDF of this presentation and a video of tonight's Zoom for anybody who missed parts of it on our website tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.